Seeing Rian Johnson in front of a crowd of fans autographing Last Jedi posters is really sort of a thing of beauty. It's pretty amazing. Welcome to my nerd world. I am your host, John Justice, for a Star Wars podcast. This week on the show, we will talk a little Rian Johnson and his producer, Ram Bergman. They've started a new production company. There's an article in Deadline where they mention their Star Wars trilogy once again. Knives Out premiered. It's Rian Johnson's next movie. Getting very well received. What does that mean for Rian's Star Wars trilogy? Well, I'll do a little speculating on that front. Trailer date for The Rise of Skywalker full trailer. I have details on that. Some comments from Jason Ward, MakingStarWars.net, on his podcast earlier this week that I want to share with you that haven't been getting a lot of attention, and I feel like they warrant attention. Is J.J. Abrams looking to the prequels in designing and telling the story in The Rise of Skywalker? I have the evidence that says potentially that is the case. Listener feedback, and maybe time permitting, we'll get to an after show this week. Needless to say, thank you for joining the show. As always, you can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, and the show is brought to you by the science fiction space opera series EMBARK. You can get EMBARK Book 1 and EMBARK Treasure and Darkness Book 2 right now, written by John Justice. Hey, that's me. At Amazon.com, the ebooks are available right now, still for only 99 cents a piece. Well, I'll have more details on that at the end of the show. But we have to get into the show to get to the end of the show, so let's go ahead and do just that.
We've passed on all we know. 1,000 generations live in you now. But this is your fight. Be with you. No one's ever really gone.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? No one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
We don't talk enough about how special Star Wars is. And I know that that might not seem like it's true, but I believe that it is. I don't think that we recognize often enough how special Star Wars is in the context of how difficult it must be for the content creators and the storytellers to have to constantly live up to such a high expectation. Star Wars is special. What George Lucas did in taking the mythologies of old and putting them into a Flash Gordon-style serial motion picture and crafting this universe and this own mythology based off of things that we can all as Earthlings relate to, it really is unique and special. And I think that that doesn't get covered enough when people are complaining about Star Wars, or even being champions of Star Wars. It is just amazing that we have this thing in our world that has brought so much good to so many people and so much joy to so many people. It's an incredibly special thing. And I'm glad that the onus is not on my shoulders, man. I can't, like, if Disney or Lucasfilm came to me and wanted me to write a Star Wars book, I would definitely say yes. But at the same time, I would be just terrified just absolutely terrified. All you can do, though, is be as authentic and as genuine as you can possibly be and hope that you're telling a story that delights you and is genuine and authentic to what you want to see. And then in the end, everybody else sort of hops on board and goes along for the ride. I don't envy J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, for that matter, with what he's been through, obviously, and what he is going to go through when he starts the next trilogy that he's going to be working on with his producer. And that's where we're going to start the show off this week. I gave you the promotion at the start of everything we're going to be talking about. Let's dive into it. Out of Deadline. Deadline.com, an article in reference to, or I should say regarding, the reason why it was written is because the premiere at the TIFF Festival of Knives Out happened over the weekend. It's getting rave reviews. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But there was a piece in the article that I wanted to share with the show this week, with you this week. The partnership between Johnson and Bergman spans 15 years, starting with the Joseph Gordon-Levitt Brick, followed by the brothers Bloom, with Adrian Brody, Rachel Weisz, Mark Ruffalo, and Looper, which starred Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis. They then moved on to the event picture, making Star Wars The Last Jedi, which grossed $1.3 billion worldwide. They are crafting a new film series set within the Star Wars universe, and those plans remain on the boards. They said they were excited by T Street because it would give them the opportunity to work with artists they admire, with a company structure that makes it possible to offer quality stakes in the hits they hatch. Their Knives Out deal was entrepreneurial, and they liked working with the MRC team enough to take their long-term step with them. Okay, so this is essentially Rian Johnson and Ron Bergman creating the equivalent of what J.J. Abrams did with Bad Robot. That's what I'm taking away from this in this new T Street production company, where all the stuff that they knew moving forward will fall under this banner of the production company, and I imagine, much like Bad Robot has its affiliations with Star Wars, and the studio is working, Bad Robot is working, obviously, with Lucasfilm and Disney on The Rise of Skywalker. This is what Rian Johnson is doing along with Ron Bergman, which is really exciting and cool. I wanted to share it with you because it's another confirmation that the Rian Johnson Star Wars trilogy is moving forward. On top of the fact, and I wanted to get into this, Knives Out premiered over the weekend, and the reviews so far by those that have seen it. Now, again, you got to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt because we've seen this happen before. But these are people at a particular film festival. A lot of them are critics, so you're going to get a different sort of viewpoint from them than you would, say, the average movie goer. So the reviews coming off the premiere of Knives Out have been just raving about the film, saying that the script is fantastic, the story is fantastic, it's a great whodunit, all the performances are great. So far, everything that I've seen over the weekend on Twitter coming out of that premiere of Knives Out has been nothing but glowing and positive. So what does this mean for Star Wars? Well, one, again, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Two, wait until, with that, we have it released in theaters and what the movie-going public says about it. But if the movie is well received, I think this goes a long way in further confirming, not that it's going to change, but this movie being Rian Johnson's next film after The Last Jedi, if it ends up being a hit, critically and potentially commercially, then that obviously bodes really well for his future Star Wars franchise and his working with Lucasfilm on that series. Heard a comment recently, and I'll talk a little bit more about this because Jason Ward on MakingStarWars.net and their podcast, now this is podcasting this week, he had some off the, I don't want to say off the cuff, but he had some comments within the podcast that I don't hear anybody talking about on top of his leaks that we discussed in detail last week along with Jedi Paxis. By the way, everybody calls him Praxis now. Cracks me up. It's Paxis, Jedi Paxis. His leaks last week. He made some comments that I'll share with you a little bit later on in the show. But he also talked about that schedule that Disney released that everybody kind of flipped out over, right? That doesn't show another Star Wars film in the theaters for another 3 years. He said, Jason Ward did on his podcast, that he was told that list isn't necessarily complete. And I never thought that it was. I mean, we've seen Disney and Lucasfilm already within the Star Wars universe make changes on the fly constantly. I'm not going to waste time going down the list of all the different changes that have taken place just over the Disney-era Star Wars films. But Jason Ward making that comment rings true to me because I've always kind of felt, yeah, okay, that is a list, but there's no titles attached to that list apart from Star Wars movie, Star Wars project. So you could stick in there whatever you want. I say all this because I'm of the opinion that a successful Rian Johnson, critically acclaimed Knives Out film does, in my opinion, have the potential to bring about his Star Wars movie sooner, to capitalize on that. It would just be the smarter move to move forward and maybe push up, and maybe this is already the case. Perhaps it's part of the deal, and Rian Johnson knows this, and this is pure speculation, but perhaps it's like, hey, let's see how Knives Out does, and then we'll make a final call on which movie gets the first appearance on the big screen. I know that we keep hearing about the Benioff and Weiss. That's going to be the first one. They're doing one, but with their Netflix deal, that kind of throws a big question mark on top of that, in my opinion. So with Knives Out and Rian Johnson growing as a director, it desperately makes me want that Star Wars trilogy by Rian Johnson and Ron Bergman even more than I did before, right? Rian Johnson is still a relatively new director, and The Last Jedi, while I feel like it's a masterpiece, is not without its flaws. You can make and learn and grow. I mean, I know about that from my own experience writing my 3 novels, the third one I'm still working on, but I think it's going to be pretty clear by the time I get to the end of my first trilogy in my EMBARK series, the third book is probably going to end up being the best one just because I've grown so much and learned so much as a writer. So Rian Johnson, having done the films that he did, having done The Last Jedi to critical acclaim, but not without its controversy, to follow it up with this whodunit in Knives Out, if it ends up being a big success, I'm sure he learned a ton on The Last Jedi that he applied to that film, and heading into a brand new Star Wars trilogy, he's going to be even in a better position than he would have been before, and that really has me excited. So I imagine that coming off of The Rise of Skywalker, after the release of Knives Out, Disney is going to be pretty quick to want to establish when Rian Johnson's movie is coming out, when the Benioff and Weiss movies are coming out, and we can then make a better determination on whether or not the success of Knives Out had anything at all to do with that. All right, one more quick point on The Last Jedi, and then we'll move on to a bunch of the Rise of Skywalker stuff. If you've ever, this is just a life hack, pro tip. May have mentioned it on last week's show, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. I don't go back and listen to the shows, so I may have mentioned this before, but if I didn't, I wanted to make sure I said it here. The Last Jedi is a long movie. And I remember addressing this with a couple of listener emails, I don't know, like a year ago or longer now, talking about how long the movie was. And it makes it difficult sometimes, depending on what your daily schedule is. If you're a husband and a father like I am, it's hard to sit down and sneak in among the other things that other people in the house want to watch The Last Jedi in its entirety of 2.5 hours. The way to get around that, I found out on my last viewing of The Last Jedi, is you can treat the film as part 1 and 2. And I've actually started doing this in my viewing of the movie. There is a perfect midpoint, it's just about lands at the midpoint of the film, that really, really provides a fantastic opportunity to watch The Last Jedi in 2 parts and still make it totally enjoyable. If you stop part 1 of the film at the point where Rey leaves the island after her fight. So the end of part 1, the culmination of the end of part 1 of The Last Jedi would be the finger touching loving scene provided by the confrontation between Rey and Luke and Rey leaving. And then the final scene for part 1 will be Luke going to the tree and Yoda's appearance burning down the tree. And if you stop the movie at the final shot and the crescendo of John Williams' amazing score with Luke and Yoda staring at the burning tree, you stop it there, it makes for a fantastic part one viewing of the film. It's really, really satisfying. You don't walk away going, oh, man. No, you walk away going, all right, I got part one down. And then you start off with game on. We're right into our heroes, right? It really kind of plays out a bit like A New Hope and the Empire Strikes Back. Because you start the next movie with, all right, our heroes are on their journey now, and it's game on, and then it's just nothing but nonstop until the end of the film. So, just a quick life hack. If you're looking for a way to watch The Last Jedi and you find yourself in a situation like I am constantly of not being able to complete the film, that's the perfect place to stop it. Right around an hour and 15, hour and 20. It works out really well. All right, let's go ahead and move on to some other things.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
I will have a spoiler warning coming up in a little bit for those that don't want to hear about some of the leaks that took place last week. So I'm not going to be diving deep into them. There's just a couple of examples that I want to give with one of the talking points of comparing what we know about the Rise of Skywalker to the prequels, that I have to point to some of those leaks to serve as my examples. But again, I'll give you fair warning before we get there. All right, but let's talk a little Rise of Skywalker promotion and what to expect. There was a post on Reddit that dropped, and since then there's been a couple of other posts of some different film theater chains and companies, theater companies that have been posting run times for the full trailer. I was surprised over the weekend going and seeing It Chapter 2 on Friday to see that they showed the sizzle reel in the theater before the movie started. How exciting is that? That's what, and look, I predicted that a long time ago. I said a long time ago that it would be in Disney's / Lucasfilm's best interest to put together a trailer that has clips from all the films. I do think it's a little odd the way that they did it in release order and not in chronological order. Be that as it may, it was really cool that they're showing this montage with that. With those clips at the very end of The Rise of Skywalker. I find it funny that J.J. Abrams just called it a sizzle reel, that it wasn't really showing much when essentially it showed just about as much as the original teaser did. Just saying. Anyway, there was a post on Reddit where somebody shared an email and they blacked out the appropriate information from one of the theaters that they work at. It looked legit. And the email was to other employees of this theater chain saying that they can expect, and I'm paraphrasing, they can expect the full Star Wars trailer to be attached to the release of Maleficent 2 on October 9th. So that debuts on a Wednesday, October 9th. And that the full Star Wars trailer would be attached to that Disney film. That would point to, if they're going to follow the same model that they did before, to a Monday Night Football debut of the trailer on Monday night, October 7th. That makes sense in my mind because the Triple Force Friday is that Friday beforehand. It even makes a little bit of sense to me that they may end up releasing the full trailer not attached to Monday Night Football. That game's going to suck. It's the Browns and the 49ers. So they actually would need some eyes attached to it. So it would make sense that the Disney company would want to attach the Star Wars trailer to bring eyes to that game, because I don't think many people are going to care much about that game. And it would kind of fall into the same sort of time frame that the Last Jedi trailer was released, right around the beginning of October. The Force Awakens trailer didn't debut until like the 19th of October. But I would also argue, whether or not this has any bearing on it, I would argue that we had quite a bit more trailer material and footage from The Force Awakens at this point in time than we did for The Last Jedi or so far for The Rise of Skywalker. So to me, it makes sense that they would be releasing it at the beginning of October. So all signs seem to be pointing to that. And again, you got to kind of eyeball that Monday Night Football game, because that's what Disney has done for the other two, the three movies, actually. They've debuted all full trailers at Monday Night Football. So I have a tough time believing that they would change course this time around, but anything is possible. They've already done that with pitching off of the behind the scenes in favor of that sizzle reel. So either way, I'm looking towards that week, and I can't wait to see this full trailer because it's got to deliver. This trailer has to deliver. It's got to really open up the story and get people psyched for this movie. That's not to say that people aren't. I think people are. People are clamoring for this film. All the shots so far have been really compelling, but that trailer has got to really, really bring it hard when it comes out, and I can't wait to see what they're going to do. All right. Before we get into the spoiler stuff, let me mention what Jason Ward has heard about The Rise of Skywalker specifically, and I'm going to talk a little bit more Last Jedi, specifically comparing it to The Last Jedi. Jason said, and again, I'm just kind of giving you the gist of what he said on his show this week on Now This Is Podcasting. He said that he's heard that The Last Jedi will actually have had more of the action. That when you're looking at the two films, that The Last Jedi will be the one that's more action-packed than The Rise of Skywalker. And I feel like, one, that's a good thing because of how JJ films his movies and how he writes as well. And I'll get into a little bit more of this coming up when I get into potentially the inspiration for The Rise of Skywalker. If you look at J.J. Abrams' movies, J.J. Abrams' films, in my opinion, are very compelling, very rewatchable, and that's mostly because of not just the action, but also the non-action sequences and the way that he shoots his films and the way that he frames his shots. Reminds me a lot in a very different way to what David Fincher does. I'm a big David Fincher fan, and if you've watched the Netflix series Mindhunter, you'll know what I'm talking about. David Fincher has this amazing way to suck you into dialogue in a scene that anybody else shooting would have made incredibly boring, and he makes just dialogue scenes and static shots really, really exciting and fun to watch. Christopher Nolan does that. J.J. Abrams does that too, but he does it in a more stylistic fashion. But it makes sense to me that this movie is going to have to be rich with a lot of dialogue to flesh this storyline out if what we know so far is to be true. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this coming up in just a moment. The other thing that Jason Ward said about The Rise of Skywalker is that multiple sources have told him that The Last Jedi is going to get more accolades after The Rise of Skywalker because The Rise of Skywalker pays off stuff that Rian set up in The Last Jedi. And if the visions and the Force flash fights and the things of that nature and Force Skyping, look, if that's what they're referring to, then yeah, man, you owe that all to Rian Johnson, who really stepped out there and really opened up the mythology to allow for these things to happen. Now, granted, J.J. Abrams did that too. I think J.J. Abrams deserves some credit because I really do think that these Force flash fights that we've been hearing about, where they battle and they're going to different locations during the battle through the Force, I really do think that that is very similar to what J.J. Abrams established with the touching of the lightsaber in The Force Awakens and the Force back scene that Rey went through, and we're probably going to get more of that coming up in The Rise of Skywalker. But I'm just so giddy with excitement at the opportunity for J.J. Abrams to take and put his spin and his style and his camera lens and writing on what Rian Johnson created in The Last Jedi. That has me just really, really, again, giddy excited is where that puts my head at. I mean, I cannot wait to see what J.J. Abrams may have pulled and done with what Rian Johnson did, because what J.J. Abrams does is more accessible, in my opinion. Rian Johnson is more artful in his approach, and that's why, in my opinion, you've had so much controversy around that film, is that he did take a more artistic approach than J.J. Abrams. That's not to say that J.J. Abrams isn't an artist. I truly believe he is, but he creates his movies in such a way that they are that they have a visual dynamic and a pace to them that's a little bit more accessible to the mainstream audience than, say, what Rian Johnson does. And going back to Knives Out, that's what has me excited about watching Knives Out and what Rian Johnson can do for his Star Wars trilogy, because if Rian Johnson is learning and pacing his films differently and writing tighter stories, because that's what happens, you hone your skills, right? You just become better at your craft. If he's doing that and he can continue to advance as a director and perhaps adopt a little bit more of an accessibility that J.J. Abrams has, that J.J. Abrams' accessibility for the mainstream audience combined with Rian Johnson's artistry, I mean, that's just a recipe for some fantastic entertainment. So I hope these sources and what Jason Ward shared are correct, because I think that would be absolutely amazing.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
All right, so we're going to get into a little bit of spoiler territory coming up in the second part of this conversation, which is going to fill up the majority of the topic for the show this week before we dive into to listener feedback. One of the other news items was Ian McDiarmid and Hayden Christensen have been out on the convention circuit, right? It's convention season. And they've been hanging out in public and visited some children in a hospital recently. And they were scheduled to share the stage at a convention, I believe, in Florida, and Disney pulled the plug on it and said that no photographs would be allowed of them and no Q&A, and they were not allowed to go and do the stage presence, right, at this convention. Of course, this is fueling speculation that Hayden Christensen will appear in the film, The Rise of Skywalker. Okay, there's two ways to look at this. One, we don't have any evidence of that. It certainly does lend itself to that, and I can see where people are jumping to that conclusion, and if I had to guess, that probably is the reason why, and I'll tell you why, because you go back to the original Return of the Jedi script, and there's some evidence of what may potentially happen if it pushes back against some of the leaks that we've heard, especially from last week. But it could also mean that they want to keep the mystery alive and get people thinking that Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker will appear in The Rise of Skywalker, so they'd rather not have Hayden Christensen be specific that he's not in the film. I would think that Disney would make him sign something saying you can't mention either way, you got to do a no comment. The fact that they're keeping them from sharing the stage together really does point to an appearance of Hayden Christensen in The Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, and Disney going out of their way to make sure that they're keeping a lid on that for fear that some leaks might come out in a casual conversation at a not-so-well-known convention, right? Like the one that was going to be allegedly taking place in Florida. So how could Anakin come back in The Rise of Skywalker? Well, look, there's a couple of different things that can happen, right? Obviously, the Force Ghost angle of it is a big possibility. But the original Return of the Jedi script in a couple of different versions not only showed the Force ghosts of Anakin and Obi-Wan coming back to assist in defeating Palpatine at the end of Return of the Jedi. There's also a version of the script where Obi-Wan Kenobi actually comes back in the flesh. And I won't dive into right now. You can go and find those old scripts to kind of see how that worked out. But that was a part of the original script of Return of the Jedi. And so if J.J. Abrams did go and consult with George Lucas on the writing of the story for The Rise of Skywalker, then it makes some sense that if they're looking towards the ending, they may have gone and taken some of the ideas that George Lucas abandoned for whatever reason for Return of the Jedi and put them in The Rise of Skywalker. Here's a quick theory scenario that could play out that I would definitely be down with. And it fits in with The Rise of Skywalker. What if we do have Palpatine's return, however that is, whether it's in the flesh, whether it's in the form of a possession. And I'm pushing aside some of the rumors that have been out there in the leaks about how it's going to end, because I know that this doesn't necessarily align with what's been put out there, but the ending has been the biggest question mark in these leaks, with the lack of specificity and the sort of the different versions that have been put out into the public over what could possibly happen. But this is just a potential scenario. It makes some sense to me that at the end of the film, if there is a battle between Rey and Ben Solo, right, who's come back to the light against Palpatine and they're losing, maybe they're both at the point of defeat, which would make story sense considering that Palpatine is the biggest bad. So it would be difficult for them to defeat, for Rey and Ben to defeat him, unless it's part of the storyline that only together they can do that. But what if they're both bested to the point where they're about to lose and Anakin Skywalker shows up and uses his power to finally go and defeat Palpatine once and for all, to finish what he started in Return of the Jedi but didn't succeed at? I think that would be fantastic. And again, most of the ideas that I've heard have been pretty good. Most of them. Some of them have not been good at all. The Jedi Paxis leak that came out, the ending of that, I think across the board, most people agree they do not like it. And we'll get into a little bit more of that with listener feedback, because I know a lot of you guys commented on that as well. Getting back to J.J. Abrams for a moment before we dive into how The Rise of Skywalker could potentially mirror the prequels. This talk of J.J. Abrams and hearing Jason Ward's comments about The Rise of Skywalker really got me thinking about J.J. Abrams as a filmmaker and his other movies, including The Force Awakens. And looking at him as a filmmaker and some of his other films, I think can really be of great benefit when trying to analyze how The Rise of Skywalker is going to play out. For example, J.J. Abrams, almost all of his movies, has an opening scene that really sets the stage for the rest of the film. So if you look at Mission Impossible 3, it starts off with a flash forward to Ethan Hunt being tortured by the villain in the film before we kick into the opening credits. If you look at the Star Trek 2009, the beginning of the film, the flash back to the attack on the Kelvin and setting up the birth of Captain Kirk, right? And a very thin Thor of Chris Hemsworth at the beginning of that movie before we get into the opening credits. Star Trek Into Darkness, the opening of that movie on the planet where they're trying to stop the volcano from blowing up before we get into the credits, setting the scene. You get into TFA, and of course we're doing things more Star Wars style, so you have the opening logo and the crawl leading into what? The opening scene that introduces us to one of the heroes of the film and the main villain, setting the stage of Lor Santeca handing off the map to Skywalker. You know, this will begin to make things right, the opening lines of the film. So, getting into The Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, it's going to start with the First Order. And this is where we get into a bit of this...
The hyperdrive is leaking.
...territory. I think this film is going to open up. I know that the leaks have said that there's this potential flashback to Luke and Leia training, at a younger age when she finds out that she's first pregnant with Ben Solo, and we get a flashback. So I have a hard time believing the movie is going to set up in that way. I think that J.J. Abrams will probably go a more direct route and, start this off in a similar fashion that Return of the Jedi started off and Revenge of the Sith, and we'll get into the prequels in a moment. So I'm of the opinion the movie starts off with the First Order, Kylo Ren. A lot of this can be handled within the crawl, but I think it's going to set the stage for what they're looking for, the Palpatine angle, the Sith fleet, and what this journey is ultimately going to be about before we jump to what we believe is the actual sort of first scene of the film, which again looks like it's going to potentially mirror the prequels in a lot of ways, and I'll get into that in just a moment. Last comment, though, on J.J. Abrams and his writing style and what we can pull from it and other films and other scripts to look to The Rise of Skywalker. Reading the leaks that came out last week and what we know of the storyline so far, it sounds a little confusing and a little convoluted. With that in mind, I present to you the script for Star Trek Into Darkness. I really love that movie. I actually like Into Darkness more than the 2009 version. Right? It really does. You can look at the 2009 Star Trek and Into Darkness, and when all is said and done, after the trilogy is over, I really do feel that you can place the 2009 Star Trek movie on top of The Force Awakens and compare them as a J.J. Abrams' first step into this franchise, and then do the same thing with The Rise of Skywalker and Star Trek Into Darkness, where J.J. Abrams, the gloves are off, he can go and do what he wants to do. The 09 Star Trek is essentially a Star Wars movie. J.J. Abrams said as much, not realizing he would be directing the first Star Wars movie in, Lord knows how long with The Force Awakens. He designed that as a Star Wars movie. It has the action and pacing of a Star Wars movie. He said as much. Into Darkness is if you were to go and try to describe that movie, is incredibly confusing. Right? If you had a bunch of leaks about Into Darkness, it would read in much the same way the leaks for The Rise of Skywalker did. J.J. Abrams writes, relatively speaking, kind of intricate scripts, right? A little bit loose on plot, and they kind of get all over the place, right? And I really do think that if you want to get a gauge on how The Rise of Skywalker is going to play out and be paced, I would say go and look at Into Darkness as the example and not The Force Awakens. And apply the leaks that we got from Jedi Paxis and MakingStarWars.net last week, and you can really begin to see the comparison between the two. Because Into Darkness is a really fun movie. Again, I love that film, but it is kind of confusing. But J.J. Abrams does a really, really good job of keeping everything paced nicely and making it all very, again, accessible and easy to understand. All right, so let's get to an epiphany that I had in the middle of the week this week.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So after those leaks came out last week, I started down this path. And I have to thank Zach Weber over at the Knights of Vader and his Daft Punk Zam Wessel comment. Because when we first saw the images of Zori Bliss from The Rise of Skywalker, right, played by Kerry Russell, everybody rightfully pointed out that she kind of looked like Zam Wessel. The color was oddly very much the same, if not exactly the same. You've got a hint of gold in there. Just the aesthetic is very Star Wars, so it's going to lend itself to that. But this is supposed to be like a bounty hunter type character. There were a lot of comparisons there. I absolutely agreed with that. And then I started thinking more and more about what we've learned about the film. And it got me wondering if J.J. Abrams is designing, modeling, did he write The Rise of Skywalker to echo the prequel trilogy in the same way that he created The Force Awakens as a bit of an echo and comparison to the original trilogy? E.C. Henry on Twitter does a fantastic job of breaking down The Force Awakens and how you can essentially place A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi elements into the first, second, and third act of The Force Awakens, and it completely fits. I won't go into all of it right now. This has been talked about ad nauseum, but you all know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of similarities in The Force Awakens to the complete original trilogy, not just A New Hope. So here's my list. I'm starting to think that J.J. Abrams, and this would be really clever, by the way, just because he looked to the prequels for inspiration doesn't mean they're going to be like the prequels if you don't happen to like the prequels. But it makes sense to me that if you're looking for connective tissue and you want to create a final movie to this 9-part saga and you want to make it all connect beyond the key players, Palpatine goes a long way in doing that. I've said that many times. Why not go and do story beat nods to the prequel trilogy, and maybe even do them better than what you saw and remember? So here's the list, and I would really love to hear from you if you pick up on anything else based off of what we've heard. And then come December, and I think also come October, beginning of October, when we get the full trailer, we'll know even more whether or not that is the case. So, the ways that The Rise of Skywalker could mirror the prequels like TFA mirrored the original trilogy. If we start on a forest planet, okay, in the footage that we've seen so far, we've heard a lot of speculation, and I agree, and I talked about it last week, that most likely the shot of Leia and the shot of Rey throwing her lightsaber, which is a couple different shots in that scene based off of her holding the stick, right, and the Jedi training remote, and then her hugging Leia, right, that's probably all part of the same scene. And most people have speculated, and I agree, that most likely that's Leia training Rey. If you're going to be pulling footage from the previous films because of Carrie Fisher's unfortunate passing, it makes sense that she would be speaking words of wisdom to Rey before she went off to go find Luke at the end of The Force Awakens, and you could take that and apply it to a training sequence with Rey. So if the movie starts off with that, that would be very reminiscent of what? Not just Return of the Jedi, but certainly The Phantom Menace, starting off in space, the arrival of the Jedi, and on the ship at the beginning, above the planet, and then where do we go first? We go down to a very forest-type planet, which would certainly be different than the way that Return of the Jedi starting off after the Empire shot, by going down to a desert planet. Okay, so that's one. We're going to get into more. The Sith fleet and the Sith troopers. If they are clones, the comparisons are obvious. I personally believe we're going to find out they're clones. That makes the most sense. If the Sith fleet has been sitting out in the unknown regions forever, how in the world do they have a whole army of Sith troopers? Well, if they're clones, then there's a lot of genetic modifications you can do with them for whatever reason to keep them in stasis or whatever. I'm of the opinion they're clones. They look like clones from the prequel trilogy. And until the movie goes and tells me otherwise, I'm saying they're clones. Okay. Getting into the leaks last week, the looking for an object. We believe, based off the leaks last week, that there is this dagger, this Sith dagger, that ends up being a bit of a MacGuffin that has a translation on it. The translation of that object sends our heroes to the planet Kimji in The Rise of Skywalker, where we meet Zori Bliss, right, who looks like Zam Wessel. Where there, we've heard, is rumor of being a droid factory. I don't know about you, and this is the one that really sent me down the prequel path. That sounds an awful lot like Attack of the Clones. And a nod to Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Camino saber dart, its association with Zam Wessel at the beginning of that film. He goes to Dexter Jettster. Dexter has to go and tell him where he thinks the Camino saber dart came from, which sends him to the cloning facility. And of course, we also have the droid factory to boot in Attack of the Clones as well, if there is a droid factory on Kimji, which we've heard there is, and they went there because of an inscription and a MacGuffin. That sounds an awful lot like Attack of the Clones to me. Also, C-3PO, the Red Eyes, we've heard, is him having to translate the Sith writing, which may change C-3PO to adopt a more aggressive personality. We've seen him with the bowcaster, with the bandolier, and some of the promotional photos and the leak stuff. That sounds an awful lot like C-3PO on Geonosis when he head swaps with the battle droid. Okay. The fight on the Death Star 2 that we've seen on the poster and in the trailer, I'm not going to get into where that happens in the film. I personally think it's part of the Force Flash fight. Be that as it may, that is obviously very similar to the Anakin and Obi-Wan lava fight on Mustafar. Right? Just cool, not hot. Force, Flash fights, and visions. Go back and watch the prequels, man. They are filled with them. Anakin Skywalker's motivation is what he keeps seeing. You know, it starts off in Attack of the Clones, and it keeps going in Revenge of the Sith. And if J.J. Abrams is really tapping into all these films, we didn't get into a lot of that at all, certainly from a visual standpoint, in the original trilogy. But you go back to what we saw in those visions that Anakin was having, along with what we have now with what Rian Johnson gave us in the Force Skyping, and that really creates an exciting scenario where we can tap into some of those things that were entertained and showcased more in the prequels than they were in the original trilogy. Let's see, what else do we got? Oh, Zori Bliss looks like Zam Wessel. I already covered that. Here's the last one. This one's a little weak, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways because it could potentially come to fruition. But the last one I'm going to give you is Matt Smith, Palpatine, Darth Sidious, and all that. Okay. We've heard the potential of Palpatine being able to possess individuals, right? I still believe that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio could go all in and make Darth Plagueis a piece of this puzzle. I still think that is a huge possibility. Okay, be that as it may. That would be a big jump, because essentially you'd have to end up making Palpatine, I think, Darth Plagueis all along. But we won't go there right now. The point I wanted to make is if, let's just say for the sake of argument, that Palpatine is possessing people, or, maybe he's always done that. Wouldn't it be interesting as if another nod to the prequels is we get Matt Smith as a Palpatine, but then we only get Palpatine revealed after or in the middle of a fight, much in the same way that we saw Palpatine's true form, we believe, in Revenge of the Sith, finally revealed in the standoff against Mace Windu, when Anakin ultimately turns. That would be a really interesting nod, where Palpatine is back, but he's possessing Matt Smith, and only through the point of stress is his true form revealed, and at the very last moment, we actually do get Palpatine back in the flesh, much in the same way that we got him in Revenge of the Sith. Now, again, that's a bit of a stretch. I'm just throwing it out there in case it happens, because that will be another way to tie in the sequel trilogy, and more specifically the Rise of Skywalker, to the prequel trilogy. Reminds me a lot of Tangled, and the evil mom in Tangled, and how she keeps herself young via the flower in Rapunzel's hair to stay young. I just throwing that out there as a possibility. I'm not married to it by any stretch, but I just thought that would be a fun one to go and share. Well, what do you think of this? Did I miss anything? Are there any other comparisons that can be made? Right? I didn't go down, and I could have, and I'll leave it up to you guys, because I'm sure several of you will do this. But if J.J. Abrams is really looking back at the prequel trilogy for some inspiration for The Rise of Skywalker to tie all these 9 movies together, it makes a heck of a lot of sense of the whole reverse Amidala situation. Right? Just saying. It's a nice way to bookend all 9 movies and the sequel trilogy and the prequel trilogy. So, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can also drop a comment on YouTube. And, of course, I will read them back on next week's show. Speaking of reading them back.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's dive into listener feedback this week. Got a lot to get to. First one comes from a friend of the show, Agnes. In the view of all the leaks and discussions, I also listened to Girls with Sabers and AT-AT Chat. I'm starting to think that Johnson meant it quite literally when he said that Rey and Kylo are 2 halves of the same protagonist. I agree. I started to suspect that Reylo means that in the end, Kylo and Rey will become just one person, one being. Interesting. There will be no Sith, no Jedi, a closure to the saga. As for spoilers, I just want to say I don't mind spoilers at all. I really don't understand the whole issue of spoilers. When I go see an adaptation of any of the books read, I know the story, but what interests me is the execution. So nothing can spoil the movie for me. And you are right, the storyline told in a few sentences does not give justice to the worlds and action built around it that we have not seen yet. Just think about another dull storyline. 2 people run around some fantasy land with a piece of jewelry. They try to destroy it to keep an evil spirit at large. They meet some elves and wizards and knights on their way. They do it for nearly 1,000 pages of a book. Agnes wraps up with cheers. We're going to get into a little bit more spoilers with the after show this week. Look, it really just comes down to that very first time of watching the film. Right. And that's what I'm going to say when I get into the spoiler talk. It depends on what your view is on that very first watching of the film, because once you watch the film for the first time, spoilers go out the window, right? All right. Moving on. Friend of the show, Anthea Gaia, says this: the Making Star Wars leaks sound reasonable. I'm not really a fan of the Jedi Paxis leaks. They just don't make sense with the other leaks that we have heard and are directly contradictory. One thing is that I can't figure out is how would they film a younger Luke and Leia training? They would have to use younger actors and use CGI to make it work, and I don't see them doing that. I don't know. Have you seen the hoopla on Twitter regarding the user Mar, who live tweeted the entire Star Wars saga? Yeah, man, it was fantastic. It was awesome to see everyone enjoying her discovery and the joy of Star Wars. Then a few days later, once she gained attention of Rian Johnson and some other official Star Wars counts, the fandom menace swooped in to attack her to the point that she stated she was going to get a lawyer. I mean, is this what we've come to, that people have to attack someone who likes the Star Wars movies, but maybe likes them in a different way than they do? I'm so upset with the state of the fandom right now. What happened to just letting people enjoy what they want and how they want to? I'm with you. Thank you, Anthea Gaia. I'm absolutely with you. I ignore the fandom menace. And kudos and a hat tip to you who have left numerous comments to me and emailed me saying you don't like The Last Jedi, but you don't mind that people do. That's the way that it should be. The fandom menace only has power because of the way that we have social networking now. That's it. And it's unfortunate. The only way to strip the fandom menace of the power is to ignore them. And I know that that's a tough thing to do. It really does suck that there are horrible people out there, but there have always been horrible people out there. Unfortunately, social networking just provides them with a platform to spew their nonsense and irrational behavior. I don't care what movie you like and don't like. Just don't tell me that anybody is wrong for liking what they like. That's all. All right, thank you for the email, as always. Steve S. says this, maybe a bit off topic, but I just watched The Last Jedi again. Did anyone notice that when Ben got chastised and struck down with lightning, he was just about to pop up and engage Snoke one-on-one right then and there, and then he looked around and saw all the guards, planting seeds later that he knew he would need Rey to accomplish this goal. Yep. Watch it again, and it is clear as day. As is his decision to follow through with killing them when Snoke says that he was manipulating them and they show Ben's reaction shot. That dude is so good at conveying so much with just a look. JJ and Ryan bring the best out of him. The scene in the scene when he and the TIE fighters take on the Resistance ship after they jump to light speed and they track him down. And General Hux does his, we can't cover you at this range, come back after both the TIE fighters have been taken out. There's this grunt that Adam Driver does in the TIE fighter that is just this frustrated sort of, so fantastic. Such a great little moment. And again, just as an example of how Adam Driver can convey what it is that you mentioned there in that email. Thank you so much for the comment. Disney Desi says this, Daisy said, we have a great fight. That makes it sound like only one fight. So my bet is the Death Star Force Flash is one fight and they're actually training, not actually fighting on the desert planet. I'm with you on the fight part of it and when it takes place. I do think they're fighting, but I think that's part of the Force Flash fight where they end up coming to a head at the end of that and they reach some type of agreement. Just looking at it from a standpoint of what's the most logical answer as to how they're on the Death Star wreckage and fighting in the waves and all that without jumping around and drowning, it makes sense to me that it's happening in the middle of a Force Flash fight, but we'll wait to see. Thank you for the comment, as always. Deskizy Pro says this, I think Palpatine was able to open up the worlds between worlds portal. The blue vapor that arises when Palpatine was thrown over the side by Vader in Return of the Jedi is the same blue vapor style you see in Rebels when he's trying to get through the portals, and even the same style of blue vapor shown in the new poster. It may be a stretch, but there's a reason the world between worlds was introduced. One of the portals is even shown in the new Resistance cartoon trailer. Here's my only problem with that, because all that is true. We just haven't had the evidence yet. And if we have, and there's something that I'm missing, please email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or again, leave a comment on YouTube. We haven't seen a circumstance where something that big introduced in ancillary content, like a cartoon in this regard, is presented in a movie. I'm not saying they couldn't do it, and I said this last week. That's the one question I want answered, is how in the world did Palpatine come back? How is he coming back? So I'm open to anything right now, and your theory rings true based off the evidence you presented. The only reason I disagree is because we just haven't seen the evidence of something that was introduced like that being introduced in a big film. And I don't like the idea of the world between worlds and what that can potentially do. I don't like this opening up of passageways to other parts and other times, the time travel stuff, that's very, very scary in my opinion. But your theory, again, there's some credibility there, and I can understand how you got there, and we'll all find out soon enough. All right, Albert writes this. Love your podcast. Thank you. I was wondering if you will still do a live stream with other Reylo content creators when the date of the release of the movie is close for speculation. What do you think of the theory that Dark Rey is a clone? I hope she's not. I hope the real Rey goes a little dark, but I think it's a vision or a dream. So doing a live stream, I'm down with that. I've talked about it before on the show, of actually doing the show live and then putting it up for everybody to listen to. I can't personally do that with this show just because of the time fluctuates so often as to when I record the show. But certainly, if the girls with sabers women would like to have me on again, I'd love to be back on their show. I don't think Rey is a clone. I know a lot of people always jump to the mirror scene in The Last Jedi as an example of how she could be. But I always point back to Rian Johnson just saying that he had that visual in his mind for a long time, even before he started writing. He just thought it was a cool visual, and I don't think that it was because she is a clone. Again, and that remains to be seen. In terms of Rey going dark, I'm kind of with the leaks on this. I think this is just her getting a vision. And somebody said it's when she touches the one of the MacGuffins that she ends up getting this vision, so she has an idea of what's happening. I also think it's a possibility this is something that Kylo Ren sees that may really have an impact on his journey in the movie. But as always, thank you for the comment. Albert goes on to say, in the episode the other week, I discovered that you have Italian origins. Can you speak Italian? Nope. My real last name is Lo Giudice, or Legidici. That's about the most Italian you're going to get out of me. It means justice or justice of the peace, which is why I adopted justice when I got into doing content creation and radio work early on, because Lo Giudice is hard to say. I live in Italy. Oh, awesome. And I listen to you every week and keep you company with the news and the theories of Star Wars, because in Italy there are wars and popular, but it's not customary to theorize and discuss a film for years or months like in America. Here, once a film ends. That's really interesting. I am fascinated when I hear, and I need to do a little bit more digging. Thank you, Albert. I am fascinated to hear how other cultures deal with pop culture in their countries. I remember a couple of years ago, somebody commented on the criticism of The Force Awakens and what a lot of people felt was forced diversity in the film. And they made a comment that, like, yeah, man, we don't talk about any of that garbage here in Europe. Movies are just movies. We don't get into the racism aspect or potential forced diversity or diversity. So it's really interesting to me that in Italy, you don't get into speculation before and theorizing until after the movie's out. Probably a good way of doing things. Plus, I imagine you have great bread and pizza. All right, let's move on. Sierra writes this. I keep saying that the hood on Dark Rey makes her look like Dark Helmet from Spaceballs. I can't get over it. How ridiculous it looked kind of undercut that moment for me, to be honest. Either way, I think it's just a vision, Rey's vision, because I'm not sure why Kylo would be having a vision of her deteriorating inside of herself, unless they are really going to play up his feelings for her. I'll be really disappointed if it just ends up being a fan servicey moment. I put this out on Twitter the other day. I have a theory, because I thought the same thing. That shot of Dark Rey with the switchblade lightsaber, the hood is sitting up really high on her head. One explanation could be that her hair is up in buns, and that's why it's that way. My theory, when we watch the film, she's actually going to have the helmet on. I think they CGI'd out the helmet for the trailer so that you knew that it was her, so there was no mistaking it. And when she sees that vision, she's going to be wearing the Kylo Ren mask. I really do think that's going to be the case. And the thing that immediately made me think of that was in The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren was originally shown without his helmet on much earlier in the film during one of the first introductions of Supreme Leader Snoke. And they CGI'd the mask back on to make the reveal during the Rey interrogation scene a little bit more dun-dun-dun. So, just saying. It's not like Disney has ever gone and manipulated trailers. And then footage was different when we saw the movie. Miranda writes this. I'm being sarcastic. That's not what Miranda wrote. That's what I said. Miranda writes this. First comment I want to make. I think that The Last Jedi was done to make people talk about Star Wars like more than they ever had and care about it more than they ever had in their lives. I think if The Last Jedi was just some ordinary, predictable middle chapter to a trilogy of it, and it was not controversial as it's been, if people hadn't talked about it the way that they had, I probably wouldn't be excited for The Rise of Skywalker the way I am now. It's kind of motivated more people to keep up the conversation of Star Wars alive and make it even more eventful and relevant. So think of it as a blessing in disguise. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it was, the only thing I disagree with, Miranda, and thank you for the comment, the only thing I disagree with, I don't think it was done intentionally that way. I think Rian Johnson knew this was his shot to make a Star Wars movie, and he wanted to make a Star Wars movie that would delight him and would be exciting for him, and wanted to really push the boundaries of that. And that's why it ends up being what it is, right? You'll reach the biggest audience you're capable of reaching is by being as genuine and as authentic as you can be. And Rian Johnson was incredibly honest and genuine and authentic in the type of story that he wanted to tell, and took the sort of conventional norms and turned them on their head. And it worked out, made a masterful film, but it also was a very divisive film. Friend of the show, Jordan Davis, says this. I personally think there's a lot of missing information in the recent leaks, and we truly don't know what's going to happen to end the saga. It just doesn't give us the satisfying, hopeful ending we were promised if the leaks are true. Tend to agree. I think there's a little truth in Legends. I think there's a little truth in all of it. I also think there may be some shenanigans going on by Disney and Lucasfilm to try to put people off of what actually the ending is going to be, and we talked about that before. That's been going on since the 80s, so there may be a bit of misinformation out there. All right, Misconduct 1 says this. Something I've noticed in the first teaser trailer was the hands that are putting Kylo's mask back on look an awful lot like Chewbacca's hands. The only reason I think this is because I noticed his fingers under all his fur in a close-up of his hands during the scene in TFA when he was setting up the bombs on the walls of Starkiller Base for detonation. What if Kylo at some point joins Rey's crew and they use Kylo to infiltrate the Sith Empire as a spy or to obtain something they need or to stop something from happening? So, Chewbacca repairs the mask to disguise him for the mission. I know it's a huge what-if speculation and take it with a shovel full of salt to even happen, but it could be interesting. You're right, Misconduct 1. It could. Something's going on with that helmet. I keep saying it. There's something up with that helmet because it just doesn't match. We've got all these shots of Kylo not in the helmet, except on the packaging, except we see the helmet being put back together on the teaser poster. On the teaser poster, a helmeted Kylo Ren is squaring off against Rey on Death Star, right, rubble, but it's not on his head in the trailer. Why? There's something going on with that helmet, and I think it's going to play a huge role in the film. I just don't know what it is yet. All right, Maria writes this. I don't believe the Jedi Paxis leak. It's awful. I believe there's likely some bits of real info in there, but most likely the rest of it is just speculation or old ideas. We know JJ is still editing the movie, and John Williams said recently that JJ still changes scenes a lot. If those leaks turn out to be true, the ending of The Rise of Skywalker and the whole Skywalker saga is rather sad. It's not the hopeful and satisfying ending that we've been hearing about, so it's a no from me. I tend to agree with you. Again, I just take it for what it is, and we'll see what plays out. All right, Mackenzie writes this. I didn't think my levels of excitement could get any higher regarding The Rise of Skywalker. After this past week, these new leaks, I was wrong, but now I can't tell if it's excitement or anxiety. Right? They keep shifting from one to another so quickly I can barely decipher my own emotions. All I can say is those Reddit leaks have me erring on the side of caution. They're very risky. You can tell JJ is taking a page from Rian Johnson's book. Most of them I really like, but the ones concerning Ben Solo and the ending make me very concerned. I don't want him to be reduced to another Vader-esque sacrifice. Thanks again for the positive informational show. You're welcome. Yeah, again, I'm with you. I'm with you on a lot of these comments. But oftentimes it comes down to the execution, man. It really, really does. So we'll have to wait and see. JOB writes this. I hope Ben is redeemed halfway through the movie so we get some time with him as a good guy. Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. Jane says this. Some of the leaks are too ridiculous. Laughing emoji. So Luke and Leia come as Force Ghosts to take down Palps after Ben dies. They didn't think to help out before. Oh, their only family member was still before they're the only family member still lived. It all sounds as if they have to use CGI Leia to achieve some of this stuff. JJ said they wouldn't do that. Yeah, that's an interesting notion too. Based off of what they said in the previous leaks, that's or the previous information about CGI Leia, they said they wouldn't do that. But you just, sometimes you never know. All right, let's see. Love me for myself alone. I think J.J. Abrams wasn't pampering to the general fandom when he used the cantina in the TFA. Talked about that before in TFA. I think he was just pleasing the fan in himself and very much ignoring the noises of the general Star Wars fandom. Yeah, I can see that. That's a good take on J.J. Abrams, including the cantina. The Maz Kanata scene in The Force Awakens, where in the documentary J.J. said that, fans would be wondering where the cantina scene is. He had to, because he was resurrecting the concepts of the original trilogy. He needed to bring to the forefront what felt like Star Wars. Yep. The difference between J.J. and Rian is that they are completely different filmmakers. J.J. immerses himself in genre, whereas Rian is more self-aware and comments on genre. In my opinion, both are great filmmakers who produce great Star Wars films. That's a really good comparison, by the way. I like that. He immerses himself in the genre, whereas Rian is more self-aware and comments on genre. For me, Palpatine is going to be a lie. It is the legacy of Palpatine, what our heroes are fighting against, not Palpatine himself. There is someone pretending he is Palpatine, using his magic as contingency fleet, and the troops of Red Troopers. He will be very terrifying, I don't doubt that, but he will be a fraud. All right? Thank you for the comment. Love me. I appreciate it. I love you. Rose writes this. I must tell you, I really enjoy your show. Capture my attention due to your enthusiasm about Star Wars. There's a lot of shows that just tell you how bad The Last Jedi was. And for me, it was a great movie. I cannot agree with Luke being 100% a nice guy all the time. No conflict, no issues, even though this is a space fairy tale, people have problems. If to watch the new trilogy just to see a reboot, what is the point? Also, I don't need Rey to be someone. What the hell if she is powerful, because the Force decided that. I don't remember a lot of discussion about Anakin not having a father or why Tatooine. Sometimes I think the sequels were born to fail because they would never match what people dreamed happening after Return of the Jedi. There was such an amount of time to having ideas about it that now even Disney, killing the extended universe, nothing will overcome the collective thought of deciding the future of the Skywalker family. I would be much more interested in knowing the answers to the questions below. Why Adam Driver is not attending any Disney event or interview? If he is, it is likely only he is aware. I only hear about Daisy. What are the plans of the Star Wars universe by killing the extended universe? Do you really believe it is a matter of not paying George Lucas due to contracts done? If the MCU could kill Iron Man and let Captain America alive to have a family, why Luke could not go disturbed for a period of time? I do hope somehow they can do a history keeping Ben alive. There will be so much to tell after The Rise of Skywalker finishes if he is alive, or will be people so naive to think everything will end happily ever after? Let's see what JJ decides to present us in December. Thanks a lot for all your hard work in doing the show. The Adam Driver, let me address one thing here. Well, I'll address two things. The Adam Driver comment. I think a lot of this comes down to Adam Driver's schedule. He's doing these other films and projects, and I bet within his contract he has said that he's got to fulfill these other commitments, so it doesn't afford him the opportunity to go to these conventions. Okay? That's the simplest answer to me. And because his role is so big, and the fact that he wouldn't be able to say anything about it on the convention circuit with his other cast members for Star Wars, then it makes a lot of sense that he would be giving his time to his other projects and his career and would have made a deal with Disney. He is commenting about Star Wars over the weekend with one of his other projects. He has been talking about how he hasn't quite registered that Star Wars is over for him yet, right? And still kind of working it through because of the other stuff he's working on. with regard to the Star Wars universe and the extended universe, that made all the sense in the world to me for Disney to start fresh. They had to go and make a definitive statement about what the content was going to be moving forward. And you either leave those things alone or you retell the stories if you don't make extended universe legends, right? If you canonize all the stuff that was written, it really makes it difficult for Disney and Lucasfilm to create new cinematic TV cartoon content when you are potentially going to be having to adhere to all the stuff that was written before. It makes all the sense to me and was the right move for Disney to kill off the extended universe of Star Wars. Everything created from the point of purchase forward by Disney will become canon and do what they've been doing, and that is drawing inspiration from the stuff that came before and drawing inspiration from the extended universe. Everything that I've read of the Dark Empire comic book, it really does seem as if The Rise of Skywalker is taking a lot of beats from the Dark Empire comics. And if you're curious to know what that's all about, I would suggest that you go and check that out. The Dark Empire comic series. You can actually find it online if you do some searching on the internet. All right, one more quick comment. I got a comment here from somebody, or an email from somebody who said they weren't expecting or didn't necessarily want me to talk about it on the show. I'm just going to bring up one point, and I'll keep the person anonymous. They know who they are. They're on YouTube as Sky, so I'll just say thank you for that. They make this comment, and I wanted to share it with you guys. Rian Johnson tweeted West Side Story while he was making The Last Jedi. So that might mean that Rey is really related to Palpatine and Ben loves his enemy. There are so many ways the story can go. As a fan for 42 years, I want a gloriously happy ending. Anything less would be a massive disappointment. Let me make a comment about that real quick. The rumor is, and this is a big leak here.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
All right, so the speculation is that potentially Rey has ties directly to Palpatine. The way that I like that this could play out is if this battle has always been since the beginning between the Skywalkers and Palpatine, right? Even though you're bringing Palpatine back, if it turns out that he is back because he's possessed somebody or it's somebody that's doing sort of a Wizard of Oz thing, it makes sense to me that if you are going to make Rey related to Palpatine, then you have Palpatine and you have a Skywalker with Ben Solo, and then only together can those two find the balance to defeat the ultimate evil and move forward, right? Because obviously they're not going to kill off Rey. That's why I like it. There's a number of ways you can play with that and work it and make it accessible. I think a lot of that has to do with how you end up dealing with Ben Solo at the end of the film. But that, to me, is a way that works within the large picture of all 9 movies, ends up being a Palpatine and a Skywalker end up defeating the ultimate evil of the legacy of Palpatine. And with that, that's the show for this week. I'm going to save the after show for next week, looking at the clock. It's been a long show, and I've got NASCAR and football to watch. I'm going to be completely honest with you. So I'll share this article with you next week out of the University of California. Spoilers make you enjoy stories more, so you can look forward to that and whatever leaks happen between now and then. I would encourage you, if you want to support the show, as I do every week, head on over to Amazon.com and pick up a copy of the first 2 books in my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK Book 1 and EMBARK Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, both available right now for just 99 cents each in ebook. Paperbacks are available for both, and as a matter of fact, right now there are some slightly used copies of the EMBARK paperback that are also available. It's how Amazon works. When people finish the book, they can give it back, they can sell it back, and then Amazon can go and resell those. So you can actually pick up the paperback of Book 1 relatively cheap. I think it's like $7.50. The purchase of an ebook for just $1 will get you the audiobook for EMBARK Book 1 for just $7.50. And even cheaper for the audiobook of EMBARK Treasure in Darkness, which will be available any day now. So if you're looking to something to feed your adventure scientific glands inside of you and you want some good, fun storytelling written by a massive Star Wars fan, that's a fun read for all ages. If you've got kids really love this book. Kyle and his buddies, 12 and 13 years old, they really love my series, and I've got my I've got my parents and other individuals and people into their 70s who are really enjoying the books as well. So they really are for all ages, family-friendly, fun stories about evil, the heroes, love, all that stuff in a nice space opera package. Go to Amazon.com, search for EMBARK, John Jon Justice, support the show, and pick yourself up a copy for you or a friend. I would really, really appreciate it. It is the way to go and support my Nerd World of Star Wars podcast. We'll be back again next week. I look forward to hearing from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com and leave a comment on YouTube. May the Force be with you. And now here is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
The Force will be with you always.
My Nerd World.